You've definitely heard of the book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, right? It's sold something like 50 million copies. But what's the real story behind it? We're going to dive into the personal crisis that actually launched this global conversation about why men and women can feel like they're speaking completely different languages.
Wow. Those are some powerful words, aren't they? Spoken at an absolute breaking point. And believe it or not, that single sentence, that was the spark. It was the catalyst for a theory that would end up impacting millions of relationships all over the world.
And this really gets to the heart of it, to a question so many of us have asked. Why do even the most loving couples end up fighting? It's the problem the book's author, John Gray, was trying to solve. But here's the thing. He wasn't approaching this as some detached researcher. He was a husband right in the middle of his own crisis.
To really get this theory, you have to start with the story. This wasn't an idea born in some lab. Nope. It came out of a raw, real-life conflict between John Gray and his wife, Bonnie, during an incredibly stressful time in their lives.
So, the story begins with their daughter, Lauren. She was just 1 week old. And yeah, that's a time of absolute joy, for sure. But as any new parent knows, it is also a time of just immense pressure and exhaustion.
On top of all the usual new parent stuff, the couple was just completely drained. I mean, with the baby waking them up all through the night, they were just utterly exhausted. They were running on empty.
And then, you get the trigger. The last straw. Bonnie was recovering from a difficult birth and was in a lot of pain. Her prescription ran out, and the person who was supposed to pick up more forgot. So she was stuck at home, in pain, all day long.
So when John gets home, he basically walks into a storm. Bonnie, in pain and totally fed up, just lets him have it. And John, feeling like he's being unfairly blamed, gets defensive and asks, "Why didn't you just call me?" Well, the argument just blew up from there until he actually turned to leave. They had both hit their breaking point.
But then, right in that moment of total collapse, something shifted. As John was literally walking out the door, Bonnie's desperate plea completely changed the entire dynamic.
And just listen to how clear she is. She wasn't asking for a solution. She wasn't asking him to fix anything. She was asking for connection, for support. She just needed him to be present with her in her pain.
This perfectly sums up the core misunderstanding. John's instinct was to fix the problem. You know, why didn't you call me? Is a problem-solving question. But Bonnie's need in that moment was purely emotional. She didn't need a plan. She just needed her partner.
That epiphany, that light bulb moment where he realized he had completely misunderstood what she needed, it was so profound that it launched Gray on a 7-year mission to understand these deep instinctual differences in how we communicate, especially under stress.
So, how did this one personal insight become a global phenomenon? Well, Gray came up with a simple but really powerful metaphor to explain what he'd found: a tale of two planets. The story goes that Martians, aka men, and Venusians, aka women, met, fell in love, and were actually fascinated by how different they were. So they decided to move to Earth together. But something strange happened. The Earth's atmosphere gave them a kind of collective amnesia. They completely forgot they came from different worlds. And because they forgot, they started expecting their partner to be just like them. This, Gray argues, is the fundamental source of our relationship conflicts. He calls it planetary amnesia.
So, if we're basically speaking different languages, how do we ever learn to translate? This is where Gray's work moves from a story into a practical guide.
Here's one of the biggest differences Gray identified. Under stress, men often retreat into their cave to solve problems alone. They need space. Women, on the other hand, often need to talk through their feelings to find clarity. They need to be heard. You can see right away how these opposite approaches can lead to conflict.
And these different approaches lead to all these classic mismatches, right? He hears her talk about a problem and immediately jumps into Mr. Fix-It mode, not realizing she just wants some empathy. Or she sees him struggling and offers helpful suggestions, not knowing he might take that as a lack of faith in his abilities. It's like a constant cross-cultural misunderstanding. Now, while these might seem like really broad generalizations, and of course not every person fits neatly into these boxes, Gray's work is based on extensive research. He actually surveyed over 25,000 people in his relationship seminars. And the results were striking. More than 90% of those thousands of people said they saw themselves and their partners in these exact patterns. It showed that even though we're all unique, these core behavioral differences really resonated on a massive scale.
So what's the big takeaway here? Well, the goal isn't to try and change your partner to be more like you. The real breakthrough comes from understanding.
It really comes down to a three-step process. First, remember the metaphor. That's step one. Second, respect that your partner's way of coping and communicating is different, but it's just as valid. And finally, learn to translate. When he pulls away, it might mean I need space, not I don't love you. When she needs to talk, it could mean I need connection, not I need you to fix this.
This is the core idea. It reframes conflict not as a personal failure or some battle of wills, but as a simple, predictable misunderstanding. It provides a kind of logic behind behaviors that might otherwise just seem really hurtful. And that's the thought I'll leave you with. What if the friction in your relationship isn't really about who's right or wrong, but is simply a case of being lost in translation between two different but equally valid languages?